welcome to Art Block, the weekly show where we talk about art and how it's made. Today on the chopping block is a tutorial on how to design an original character. So, how does one design an original character? Well, let's first determine what an original character is and what it's supposed to be used for. An original character, in the broadest sense of the word, is a character that's not currently pre-existing in any form of media, whether it be books, television, etc. In internet terms, an OC can be broken down into a few different categories. Category A is basically the same as the description above. It's a character that isn't made to exist in any other universe and is generally just designed for the sake of being designed. Category A characters generally don't have any sort of narrative, however artists can provide their own characterization if they so please. Category B, on the other hand, is when an artist or writer will create a character to exist in the world that someone else has created. Often called fan characters, these OCs are more frequent in fandoms based around a source material such as My Little Pony, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Warriors, though please note that this kind of thing isn't just limited to those particular fandoms. Fan characters aren't technically entirely original, however this provides the creator a lot more opportunity to break the norm and create something that stands out from the crowd. Finally, Category C is a character who's designed to fit an original narrative and/or universe and has been created by that particular artist. Admittedly, this is one of the more challenging levels to accomplish because you're working on your own narrative, however it does provide a lot more freedoms when it comes to how you design your character and any stylistic choices when it comes to how you illustrate them. These are three general categories and each character is a case-by-case scenario, but for today we'll be focusing on character design in general terms so that you can apply the information you'll learn here in your character design process regardless of what it's for. So let's start off with step number 1, figuring out your look. Figuring out the general shape of your character is no easy process. When first coming up for the look of your character, you're going to want a general description of how they'll look before you settle on any one design. During early phases of development, you're going to want to experiment with how your character is shaped, as well as different variations of your original design. At this stage, you're not really going to be worried about color palette, but rather you're working out how the character will look in the future. It should also be noted that your character's design will evolve over time, though whether you willingly change this design is ultimately up to you. For example, Spirit the Blue Deer you see so often on the screen has undergone several redesigns since her first debut back in March of 2016, and is still having small design changes done in order to evolve the character, with the most notable changes being her antlers and her body shape. You'll also tend to notice slight changes to your character's design as your art evolves, however that can be avoided if you decide to make a reference sheet, which we'll talk about later. A rule of thumb when it comes to figuring out the basic look and shape of your character is to use the character's shape to convey the type of character they are. When you look at Nick Wilde from Zootopia, you see a very smart and charming character. The way that he's drawn is meant to convey his intelligent nature while also showing that he has a good heart. Another example is the Great Prince of the Forest from Bambi. The way that he is designed conveys not only an essence of elegance and power, but also being very wise and stoic. Depending on what your character is like and what they are meant to represent will influence their design, and that further pushes the fact that they are unique characters. After you've figured out the general shape of the character, it's time to start working in some details of the design. At this point, you're going to want to accentuate certain details in order to draw some of the viewer's attention to it. Of course, you don't want to make the design overly complicated, as having too many details can make the character's design somewhat cluttered and whoever's looking at the design will be confused on what to focus on. Finding a certain balance between the original, more simplified design and a more complex version is good because you're providing just enough detail to the character to make it distinguishable from other similar looking characters. If you're designing a character that is meant to be animated, it's generally better to stick with the simpler side of things, or else it would be incredibly hard to animate them unless you are working with 3D models or flash puppets. An example of a character's design being too complicated is actually the current design of Spirit you see on screen. When we're talking about the complexity of the character, I generally try to break down the various factors of the design into a list. Using myself as an example, we have differently colored hooves, a white belly, a dark blue saddle, 20 plus white spots, 7 plus blue spots, golden hair, pink nose, 3-pronged antlers, and turquoise eyes. Speaking from personal experience, this design can take a very long time to replicate correctly, with the most egregious details being the spots and the antlers. When optimizing a character for animation, spots, stripes, and gradients are something you'll generally want to avoid. Now let's just say that Spirit loses her spots but keeps the saddle pattern on her back. Next, we're going to want to work on the antlers. Now, considering the antlers are a pivotal part of Spirit's design, we'll be keeping the antlers, however we'll be simplifying the antlers from 3-pronged to 2-pronged. Once you've reached a happy medium, it's time to start thinking about colors. Now, as a general rule of thumb, you're going to want to avoid using too many colors in the design, or else the design will become a bit overcluttered. If you're stuck with colors, think of a theme that you find appealing. The theme doesn't necessarily have to tie into the character's design as a whole, but looking into a theme for your base colors is always a good point of reference. You can also use different shades of the same color to add a bit of variety in the design without causing any conflict with the color palette. Let's say you want to add more than one kind of color to the design. Well, this is where a little thing called color theory comes into play. If you don't know what color theory is, I'll be discussing it in a later episode, but for now we'll just call it a practical way of mixing colors together. When you're coming up with your color palette, you should find the shade that's closest to your base color, and then find the color that's opposite to that particular color on the color wheel. Confusing, I know. These two colors are complementary and look nice together when it comes to designing your color palette. Red and green are probably one of the more common of the combos, however this rule also applies to secondary and tertiary colors. There's also pseudo-complementary colors, a color that is close to your base color's complement but is off by 1 or 2 bumps. Purple and green, orange and purple, and blue and gold are some of the popular options, with the latter being incorporated by yours truly. Another option is to incorporate neutral tones, aka shades of white, gray, and black. These are good options to include because they go with every color and can provide some diversity without making the character overly colorful. I should also point out that when you're designing a character, it's a good idea to experiment with various color schemes until you've found something you're satisfied with. This is true of most artists, since a change in style and interest will tend to come with time. A good trick for when you're designing your character is to come up with a character reference sheet. This reference sheet is made to provide all the necessary details that an artist will need to draw the character, including drawing them from different angles and showing certain expressions to see how they emote and how certain parts of their anatomy work. You'll see this a lot in the industry, especially when it comes to animation and video games, because the companies want to maintain as much consistency as possible when it comes to their character design. Another thing I want to mention before we wrap up is designing 2 or more characters to complement each other. You'll tend to see this a lot in cartoons, primarily leaning towards characters that are either meant to be a duo or a couple. The way to accomplish this is to incorporate a sort of yin-yang feeling to it. You want the characters' shapes and color palettes to look good next to each other. Using complementary colors as well as differing body types can make the characters appealing on their own, but even better looking when they're together. A good example of this is Mr. and Mrs. Cake from MLP, with their body structure and color palettes contrasting each other while also remaining complementary. This rule can also apply with groups of 3 and above, however you need to keep in mind that each character will require at least one other to balance out their design. An example of this is Fry, Leela, and Bender from Futurama. Fry's color palette primarily consists of warm orange and a deep red, while Leela features purple and occasionally green. Finally, Bender is a somewhat blue-gray with a slight yellow to his eyes, providing a balanced trifecta of red, green, and blue. RGB. Ultimately, the way you design your characters is really up to you. However, I hope this video has provided you some tips on how to design your characters to be more appealing. So, today's episode was a bit different from the first few, with school back biting me in the butt. I'm gonna kind of focus on trying to make the videos a bit longer and more fleshed out with any pressure of a release schedule. So yeah, episodes come out when they come out, and hopefully they'll be a lot better in quality. Anyways, that's about it for today's show. If you have any tips on designing characters, drop them in the comments below. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. If you liked what you saw and want to see more, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to receive notifications for when new episodes of Art Block come out. Today's featured art of the day is an adorable piece from Marie D. Rose, aka Countess Rose. That's all for today's episode. I'm Spirit, and I'll see you next time.